Zavia. Thank you guys so much for coming. I feel very empowered after watching this movie for the first time. And my question is, what advice do you guys have for us that you think would be absolutely the most impactful thing we could do to change what's going on? Because I know protests are awesome, but that's showing the people who are already going, you know? So what else is, what do you think that we could do?
Hello, everybody. Oh, sorry about that, it's kind of loud. First of all, thanks so much to all of you for coming out this evening. It really means a lot to us. I love UCF. My wife got her bachelor's degree at UCF, so I have sort of a connection here. So, hello. So the question is, what can we do? Well, you guys are already doing it, right? And so are roughly 150 million people are already doing it. 150 million estimated people have seen the movie. And there's probably 140 million of those people that aren't going to SeaWorld anymore, right? So you're voting with your wallet. Our hope is that gate attendance keeps dropping sufficient enough to affect the change that we'd like to see. And that is simply SeaWorld needs to change their business model and move away from animal exploitation to something more maybe along the lines of the Monterey Bay Aquarium, where they don't exploit animals, their attendance increases year after year after year because they market themselves as the good guy that way. And so I think voting with your wallet is really the best thing you can do. And then after having seen this movie, if it's something that you think is worthy of sharing, then it becomes sort of your responsibility to try to educate others about the issues. Do your own research, you know, and find out what the realities are. And so you bear some responsibility that way.
I think, and also what you can do is talk to your political representatives. How many people in this audience know about AB 2140? Okay, a few of you guys. So AB 2140 is legislation that was introduced in California, and it's the Orca Health and Welfare Bill, or Health and Safety Act, I think that's what it's called. And that legislation is to force SeaWorld to change their business model. So the legislation was written so that SeaWorld would have to put their animals on birth control. They'd have to stop the breeding program. They won't be able to move their whales around from the different SeaWorlds, from Florida to Texas or California. So that legislation is out there right now, and it's going through a review process. And there was already legislation that was passed in New York State. It was, there are no captive orcas in New York State, but it's going to keep New York State from ever having orcas. It's largely symbolic, but I mean, every state in this country could pass legislation like that. There's legislation in the state of Washington, same thing, to prevent orca captivity from ever happening. So that's one way that you can directly affect things. So just letting your local politicians know, hey, animal rights, animal welfare issues are important to me, and if you would like my vote, then I would like you to pay attention to those particular issues. So that's another way that you can affect things directly.
Awesome, thank you three so much. And can you tell us really quickly about your company? I'm not really sure what it is.
About Blackfish Racing?
Yeah, and the Enjoy.
Oh, that's not me, that's Carrie, so she can tell you about that.
Okay, thank you. So for Blackfish Racing, what do you do specifically then?
So Blackfish Racing, we should actually have Becky talk about Blackfish Racing because I'm just racing for those guys. But I'll tell you a little bit. Becky and her husband Nathan watched The Cove, and Nathan's been running triathlons for how long? 20 years? Yeah, so they were really shocked by what they saw on the Cove movie. How many people have seen The Cove? Great, a lot of you have seen The Cove.
So we watched Blackfish.
Oh, you watched Blackfish first, okay, and then The Cove, okay. So Blackfish Racing, they call themselves multi-sport activists, and what we're doing, and this is my first time participating with Blackfish Racing, and they're running races and just letting people know what's going on at aquariums all over this country and also all over the world. And the idea is to pair a race where there's a particular orca in captivity so we can promote the cause for that particular issue. So here, obviously, it's Tilikum at SeaWorld of Florida, so that's real. So the focus of this race is about Tilikum and his situation. and there'll be another race in Miami in October, and that will be focused on Lolita. I'm actually going to organize a team in Anchorage, and we're going to run a half marathon in June, and we're going to, since there are no orcas in captivity in Alaska, we're going to run that one from Oregon. So it's getting the information out, and then when people join the Blackfish racing team, they pay a certain amount of money to get the cool gear, so you too can have this cool gear. And so part of that money goes to the organizations that Blackfish Racing supports. So it's Orca Research Trust, which is Dr. Ingrid Visser, who's down in New Zealand, and she's working to try to help Morgan at Laurel Park. It's the Orca Network, that's Howard Garrett and the San Juan Islands, and they're working to get Lolita out of the Miami Seaquarium. It's Ocean Preservation Society, and that's Luis Sahoyas and the Cove, and also Racing Extinction, and there's a fourth one. Yeah, Rico Berry's Dolphin Project. So those are the 4 nonprofits that are supported by Blackfish Racing, but anybody can race for Blackfish Racing. So if there's a race that you want to do that's multi-sport, so it doesn't have to be a triathlon, you can join the team and you can race in this cool racing gear with us.
Awesome, thank you.
Hi, so I guess you guys probably don't have like a concrete answer to this question. I guess it's more like philosophical, but maybe you've thought about it too. Why do you think that the whales only attack at times and that they don't make more of a, they don't, you know, fight more against their captors?
Well, I can say, can you hear me?
I'd like to say that our relationships with the animals are real, and that relationship that we build on a day-to-day basis, we're paid to interact with them, and it's not 100% all the time, you know, an aggressive environment. Trainers wouldn't be there if they saw that. In fact, I was there for 12 years, and there was certain things that I didn't agree with that finally I realized at the end was not beneficial to them. But they have that, it's almost like, you know, there's abusive relationships, I like to call it sometimes. Like, it reminds me of that, to where you can be in an abusive relationship, but you still love who you're with and who's the abuser. Not saying that, you know, I'm not putting it in perspective as the trainers are abusing their animals. I'm just saying they're in an environment that's not best suited for them. So there's a lot of love, there's a lot of genuine care, especially the trainers that are there right now. They wouldn't be there if they didn't feel that they were doing the right thing. That's what kept me there so long. My issue was actually safety. A lot of times the safety wasn't paramount, and it wasn't trainer safety, and it also wasn't safe for the animals at times. The biggest story that I have regarding that is we had a whale that was sick, and her name was Jozu. And the trainers were awesome, and even the veterinary staff was awesome in trying to make her well again. But we had a manager that had told us that if we treat her like a sick whale and keep her out of the shows when she's not feeling that well, that it would actually exacerbate the issue and she would get sicker. So we actually forced her to do shows when she was sick, and that was a turning point in my heart and in my life, when I was like, wow, we're caring more about the shows than we are about this sick animal. And it's not about, you know, whether or not that animal would have that same care if they were in the wild. It wasn't about that at that point. We had a sick whale that we were putting in shows. And ask anybody about that, you know, they can't lie about that. And that was a turning point in my career.
And so to bring it back, you're asking why certain animals would be aggressive at certain times and not aggressive at other times. I guess you just have to look at people. You know, it's the same thing. Everybody reaches a different breaking point. You know, and sometimes it's a perfect storm. You know, in this situation, I wasn't there at SeaWorld when the day that Tillicum killed Dawn, but you know. So I don't know all the specifics of what happened, but there was a lot of things going on during that day, And for instance, there was an altercation in the front pool during a show. There's a couple of whales fighting with each other. And these are acoustic animals, so they're really aware of what's going on with all the other members in the pool. They can't see each other, they can hear what's going on. And apparently there was some construction going on during the day as well. And then, and again, you could see how we were talking about it in the movie in the very end, that last session that Don was doing with Tillicum. There may have been things that led to him getting more and more frustrated. But was there any one thing you could say that set Tillicum off? To me, I actually back it up a little bit and I look at it as a 20-year train wreck. Just the decision to bring this animal into Shamu Stadium in the first place after he'd already killed a person. To me, that's where the mistake was made, and it was just a matter of time before he was going to kill somebody because he'd already killed one person. So, and Don was actually his third victim. But any one individual whale, sometimes I think the trainers like to think that they know the answer because that's how SeaWorld trains them to sort of save their own life and make that decision, make the right call every time. And we were taught, when we talked about it in the movie, we were taught that when mistakes were made, that it was always a trainer error. Like, I made a mistake, and if I had just done it differently, then things would have turned out better. But I don't think you can always know, just like you don't always know even people in your life that you care about or that you love, you can't always make sense of their behavior. And I think these animals are so intelligent and they have such complex inner lives that we don't understand, that there's no way for you to ever really say, they did this because of this. We can only surmise, and the more you know an animal, maybe you can make a better decision 15, 20 years in, but Don had 14 years working with this animal. So I guess the answer would be, in the end, we don't really know.
Plus, you have to think about Tillicum, when he killed Don, he's a very sick animal, right? He was on antibiotics, he was on antifungals when he killed Don. He probably didn't feel good. His teeth, if you ever get a glimpse of Tillicum's teeth, like almost all the whales at SeaWorld parks, they're broken, they're ground down, they're drilled out. His teeth are a train wreck, they've got to hurt, and that's true with all the animals there. Maybe he felt particularly bad that day, and who knows what's going through Tillicum's mind when he did what he did, or any of the whales. But he can't feel good, and it's surprising, frankly, that he's still alive. He's such a sick animal.
And I think it's actually surprising. I think, given their situation, they've showed a remarkable amount of restraint. And if the trainers spent more time in the water, and it seems like they're spending a lot of time in the water, but really compared to like an elephant trainer, I don't know what the statistics are of how many trainers have been killed by elephants worldwide, but it's a lot. So I think if there was more proximity, and the whales were if the trainers were spending the entire time at the stadium in the water with the animals, there probably would be more injuries. And there were plenty of injuries and accidents and close deaths that weren't reported.
Thank you, guys.
Hi. Oh, there's a lot of people up here now. Hi, I'm Christina. I want to say, first of all, thank you so much for everything that you've done. I know me personally, I was really excited when I heard that, some ex-trainers were going to be here, but to have the actual faces from the movie, I feel so honored, and I'm sure I'm not alone in feeling honored. I actually have two questions. I hope that's okay. I promise one of them is easy. In the movie, when you guys go out on the boat and see the wild orcas, was that the first time that you had seen orcas in the wild? No.
It wasn't for me, but it's a good question, because is anybody who's not in the management level working at SeaWorld right now, or any of the trainers, have they seen killer whales in the wild? Because I don't believe they have.
None when I was there. A couple of management staff, but none of the trainers I worked with had ever seen wild killer.
Right, and the management staff had only seen them because they were actually collecting them from the wild, so they were basically taking them from the wild to put them in captivity.
How did it feel, like, the first time you see these animals in the wild versus like the individual relationships that you've built with some in captivity?
That's a great question. So the first time I saw them, I was on a boat trying to do a short documentary with a 60 Minutes crew. It was the first time I had seen wild killer whales. And I'm supposed to be narrating, right? And I'm seeing these beautiful animals swimming, straight lines with these enormously tall, straight dorsal fins, and I was so choked up I couldn't talk. And I had sunglasses on, which is good because my eyes are pretty watery at that point. And the director kept asking me questions, you know, so Dr. Jett, what do you think about X, Y, and Z? All I could say was, you know, was I was crying because it was such an emotional thing for me. Part of my reaction to it was essentially shame at what I had been a part of at SeaWorld. I love the animals. I tried my best when I was there, and I think all the trainers that I worked with genuinely tried their best. And so I don't fault the trainers, but when you have the perspective then of seeing them in their natural habitat with their family members, swimming these straight lines, it changes your brain a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know if you read the book Death at SeaWorld by David Kirby. He gave me the last line in that book, and it was a comment after listening to a lecture with Dr. Lori Marino, who's in the film, the neuroscientist, and it dawned on me, it was a combination, the same day I heard her speak, we had just come back in from a group of us going out and seeing wild killer whales. It wasn't the first time I'd seen them because I live in Alaska, but it was the first time I'd seen them with my former colleagues, and we were all seeing them together. And all of a sudden my brain went, we didn't even work with real killer whales, we worked with facsimiles of whales. I mean, that's how, what you're seeing in captivity is such a small part of who they are. It's like, it's nothing. What's represented to you as natural behavior is nothing. It's not a fraction of what they are in the wild. And it just was this overwhelming sense of, I think it was the first time that I mean, there was a whole process that I went through after Dawn was killed, because I hadn't spoken about my experience, and I had been, as I said in the movie, I was proud of being a SeaWorld trainer, but I think that was another waking up moment for me to just realize that they're not even whales. I mean, you can't, the animals that are at SeaWorld are not whales compared to wild animals.
That's a really powerful statement. Thank you for sharing. My second question, I'm so sorry for taking up all this time. What implication does this have for dolphins? I mean, I hate to be the person who talks about the slippery slope. Where does it stop?
Honestly, I think that's a personal decision between each person. We're all gonna have our own opinion about that. You know, I'm not faulting I think SeaWorld actually does some good. You know, I'm not throwing them under the bus. And I actually sometimes, you know, ask myself that question. I did see the rescues that they had and that sort of thing, and I know that we did good while we were there, or else I wouldn't have been there for 12 years. But I think personally on my level, killer whales definitely should not be in captivity. I just don't think their size suits them to be in a controlled environment, and the dolphin thing, I'm still kind of like said, I don't think containment for entertainment is what I call it. That part doesn't sit right with me anymore, even though I was a part of it. There are venues out there, just like John was saying, where they actually focus all on research and rehabilitation, and not just saying that they rehabilitate. And I don't know too much about the pilot whales that are there right now, but I just think it's kind of ironic that they were rescued and now they're in shows. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. I think we all need to ask more questions and hold them accountable. SeaWorld right now is putting on their biggest show that they've ever put on. And we are all watching it. And I don't think we like the show that they're putting on right now. And we all just want them to give us the show that we want. We want the show, we want them to do the right thing, is basically the bottom line. You know, like Ringling Brothers, they're trying. And they've gotten so much support for that. They've realized that their business model needs to change. And that's what I think the bottom line is for me. I've made that decision that they need, you know, they at least need to be held accountable for their actions. And if it means that, you know, the killer whale environment is no longer at SeaWorld, and they, you know, still have some dolphins that are there, you know, and they don't artificially inseminate and just keep that cycle going, I think that's a really good step in the right direction. Because, you know, they have a valid point at times where you just can't, you know, let them all go. But, like I said, we all have to make our own decisions, and mine personally is no more artificial insemination, especially with the younger whales that they were, you know, trying to breed and basically make them a baby machine. And but I think a lot of us really can realize that the killer whale facilities. I mean, we can't build a big enough facility for them, really. But that's a really good question, because like I said, I think we all have to make that decision. And did you guys want to?
I was going to say something about dolphins, because I think that there is quite a bit of exploitation that goes on. Again, there are good facilities and there are bad facilities. There are facilities where the animals have plenty of room, relatively speaking, for killer whales, because these are smaller animals, but there are also facilities all over the world. I actually got to travel all over the world with this movie, and so I saw some of what was going on in Europe, and there's about 300 dolphins in captivity in Europe, and they range from, you know, something like that could be as big as this room in terms of space to like the equivalent of a backyard swimming pool, and I'm not even joking. So there's that range. And then also you have these swim with the dolphin programs that are all over the world. And so there are places that are making money hand over fist by exploiting dolphins and swim with the dolphin programs. And the problem with those programs is that they're not good for the animals and they're not good for the people either. There's a lot of situations where people have been hurt, and much of this has happened outside the US, so not all of it's reported. There's videos you can go on YouTube and see. There's one I can think of where a dolphin was supposed to be jumping over a rope or a pole and it landed on somebody intentionally. What happens is they capture the dolphins young, and they're good, they're okay early on, but as they start to go through sexual maturity, they get more frustrated and they're more likely to hurt each other and hurt the human participants in the program. And then where can they go? You know, so they're either going to end up not getting interacted with, you know, or they're going to end up maybe in a petting pool in a, you know, second or third rate aquarium. So to me, like I actually feel like it does extend to other than rescue and rehab, where there's actually a legitimate reason this animal's going to die, and we have the ability to help them. We can rehab them, we can get them back out in the wild, or we can keep them in a some kind of a sea sanctuary situation. But for me, I feel like, oh, and then the other thing is there's programs where now you can have your baby in a pool with a dolphin. There's dolphin assisted therapy. There's all this stuff out there that people, it's money. You know, and the thing is, I think the problem is that we're looking at it from a human-centered perspective. We're looking at it from the perspective of, I want to have my baby with a dolphin in the water, or I want my kid to get near a dolphin and somehow that's going to have this momentous experience for the kid and they're going to change. But nobody's looking at it from the other perspective. You know, what's it like for the animal to be in that situation? So I think when you're looking at the individual situations, you got to look at what is that animal's life really like, and is it worth it? Just because we want to get close to a dolphin, just because we want to touch that animal and have our special experience, is it worth it? And again, everybody in this room, if you're thinking about, you know, going to a Swim with the Dolphins program or going to Marine Park, it's your decision to make. And I think that you should go there and see it and make the decision on your own. But great question.
Kim said something really interesting, and she's absolutely right that SeaWorld's putting on the biggest show that they've ever put on right now. And what she's referring to, of course, is all the glitzy marketing campaigns that they're currently doing to try to convince all these folks that aren't going to the park that, hey, we're the good guy. And my sense of it is, and maybe your sense of it is the same, is that if they just would do the right thing and market themselves as doing the right thing, people would come back to your park. It'd take me 15 minutes to plan it out, right? And another 2 days to develop the marketing campaign. And on week 2, people start coming back to your park. But
a little research on animals and entertainment, and there's a common theme or condition called zoochosis, which is when an animal displays characteristics in captivity that they wouldn't really display in the wild. So I'm curious if you guys noticed any behaviors that orcas showed while you guys were working there that you might have thought were normal, but in hindsight realized that it was just kind of this zoochosis going on.
I'll start. I've never heard that term. That's interesting. One thing that you see the captive killer whales do a lot is chew on the concrete structures and the steel segregation gates between each pool. They chew on them and they break their teeth off and they grind their teeth down. Those teeth end up being, you know, problematic in the long run, causing them to have to be chronically on antibiotics, etc. In horses, this is a behavior called cribbing, and it's an aberrant behavior, and it's usually an indication that an animal's bored and understimulated. And so, you know, that's very prevalent at marine parks where you see killer whales with really bad teeth. As a result of boredom, essentially.
And just the locking behavior that he would, when you say zoochosis, are you talking about stereotypic behavior? Is there another meaning to that term?
Just kind of like examples of zoochosis would be, you know, monkeys throwing poop, just like animals hurting themselves, just things animals wouldn't naturally do in the wild.
Yeah, I mean, you see animals beating themselves up against gates, and there's plenty of info, but I've seen animals cause harm to themselves because they're so frustrated. And then the swimming endless circles around and around and around in the pools, you know, that's just what they would do. But again, what struck me seeing wild killer whales versus the captives was the almost the orderliness. It was like watching birds flying together. Like there's some synchronicity to their movements. And when you compare that to what you see with the captive whales, unless you're seeing a show where they're asked to be doing something in synchronicity, where they're all doing bows together, like there was a disjointedness in a way, like they weren't all in sync together. Versus when you watch them in the wild, it feels like choreographed, like they're all moving together. And I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't seen the killer whales in the wild. I wouldn't have realized that what I was looking at wasn't normal.
And one more question. Did you guys ever notice them giving medication to the orcas to curb this behavior? That's common practice in other areas in entertainment.
Most definitely. I mean, there's so many meds that are given, and when you're there, you think that you're giving it to them to, help them, because if they were in the wild, they would be dead, and because they're being cared for by the trainers that are there and the veterinary staff, you believe that you're doing the right thing. And, I just took everything that they said as gospel. I really believed everything, and I thought I was doing it for the right reasons. And perfect example just from where I was at, because I was at Whale and Dolphin Stadium most of the time, most of my career. We had a lot of males. Actually, all the dolphins that we had were just male dolphins. And there was a lot of aggression between the male dolphins, so we would have to subdue that with certain medications to make sure that they didn't have any sort of their natural aggression towards each other. Being in a confined space wouldn't affect our shows or affect the trainer safety. So it wasn't until after I left that I really did the research to figure out what the meds were and why we were giving it to them, and why the animals had ulcers and all of that sort of thing. Like I said, at the time, we think that you're just doing it and making them better. And you are, but you're the reason that they're in that environment and sick in the first place. So wholeheartedly, yes, we would give them medications to subdue any sort of neurotic behavior that they would exhibit.
So that's a great question, by the way. Some of the common medications are, and it's crazy to come to this realization that they're given benzo drugs, which are Valium, Xanax type drugs, anti-anxieties, right? Something that your grandparents may take, to help them sleep, for example. And of course, antibiotics, antifungals, for the different maladies that result from captive environments. I remember stuffing fish chock full of antifungal medication, right? Until the guts of the fish would come out. They were so full of nystatin, for example. Well, if you do a little research on nystatin, it's really hard on your liver, for example. It's super toxic to your liver. I didn't know that at the time. Lots of the animals are on calcium blockers, calcium channel blockers, drugs like Tagamet to help to soothe ulcers, stomach ulcers. And so the question is, well, why do they have stomach ulcer problems? And the answer to that seems to be chronic stress, right? If humans or any number of animals, mammals are put under chronic stress, one of the manifestations is ulcers in your esophagus and in your stomach, which you then have to treat with drugs like Tagamet and calcium channel blockers. So those are some of the drugs that are commonly administered.
Thank you, guys.
So this is partially a statement and a question, and purely speculative, I'm sure on your parts, unless you have personal experience with the individuals who own these parks. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt that they understand these are large marine mammalian organisms that have the capacity to develop things like post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety. They haven't developed cerebral cortex and frontal lobe. Do you think that, from an economic standpoint, they're keeping the work as purely for the revenues so that they can continue the conservation work that they do and give out the grants that they do give out for conservation work, or do you think that it's more for purely financial gain as a whole?
Financial.
What's that?
I'll take financial.
I'm going to let Sam answer that.
Yes, financial. I do think that at some point there was some benefit for having these animals in captivity. I mean, their fishermen were shooting killer whales at one point. The Navy was using them for target practice. You saw a little clip from the movie Orca. I know it looks ridiculous now. I mean, I was actually alive when that movie came out, and it was shortly after Jaws, and they were trying to capitalize on Jaws, and I was actually scared of the killer whale in that movie. But so having places like SeaWorld, I think I give them credit. They did change the public perception of these animals. I think it's gone a little bit too far towards cuddly teddy bear, but they have done a good job in educating the public to an extent. Just like sometimes seeing an animal in a circus can have some educational value, but not anymore. And I think the science has been around for long enough now. It's not speculative anymore. And I think just like the debate over whether or not tobacco is bad for you, and the debate over whether or not climate change is happening, there isn't really a debate. I mean, they're trying to keep it like there's a debate to keep their business model alive. But it's not a debate. I mean, the science really supports the fact that these animals do not belong in captivity, they don't thrive in captivity, and if you look at how they're managing their business, they're doing a poor job, but they are managing it really from a financial standpoint. Everything from the way they treat their trainers, from how much they pay their staff, and then from the focus on these animals as baby machines. They're basically inseminating them when they're like half the age they would be inseminated in the wild, and then every 2 years they're trying to make them pump out another baby. You can't, and then plus the babies that are born in captivity, they have no conservation value because they can't be returned to the wild. So if you look at their business practices and how they're marketing things, it's purely financial. I'm not saying that there aren't some side benefits there, that people don't go to SeaWorld and learn something, but I think that's an unintentional side benefit. And if you listen back in 1988 when the Marine Mammal Protection Act was amended, and SeaWorld was basically told in order for you to continue your business, you have to become an educational facility. The CEO at that time even said, we were never an educational facility, we were always an entertainment park. And that's how we came into existence, and that's our business model. So they were even complaining when they were told by the federal government that they had to change to education. Unfortunately, what happened is that the industry was allowed to police itself. So they basically said, okay, we're doing education now. That's what happened. And so yes, I mean, even back then, and the thing is now they have to somehow prove that what they're doing is educational. And so you can do all these nice surveys when people leave the park, and you can have them say, did you have an educational experience at SeaWorld? And a certain percentage of people are going to say yes, but that really doesn't mean anything, because you can learn more about killer whales with 5 minutes on the internet than you can spending a day at SeaWorld. So in the end, it's the bottom line. And one of the things we were talking about is that because of this drop in SeaWorld stock price over the past year, and because of their drop in attendance, they've had to fire how many people? Was it 300? Yeah, they had to let go of 300 employees, or that's what they say, but at the same time, their CEO, Jim Ashdown, got a golden parachute worth about $10 million. So think about that for a moment. How many of those 300 employees are probably somewhere in the range, part-time employees, or maybe at the $30,000 range? So how long would that $10 million have gone to supporting those employees who have families? I feel for those families, where people working at SeaWorld lost their job, and that was the decision that they made, was to fire 300 workers and give the CEO $10 million. So to me, that says a lot about how they're thinking.
Yeah, and so on the topic of conservation, I think just a little history, right? So SeaWorld collected lots and lots of animals from the southern resident pod, which is a wild population off the coast of Washington State. And they collected those animals in the 60s and 70s. And they collected so many of those, especially females, that population really was impacted negatively. They, they took so many of those breeding females and animals out of that population. They essentially removed an entire generation, an entire cohort of that population. That population, directly because of SeaWorld, right, because of their collection efforts, is now listed as an endangered population by the Endangered Species Act. So the natural question is since SeaWorld's so big into conservation, right, that's what their advertisements tell us. The question is, well, what are they doing about it? And the answer is they've not spent one red cent on helping that population that they decimated and that they caused to be on the Endangered Species Act. This doesn't seem consistent to me with a conservation-minded company, right? Certainly not one that they try to get a lot of mileage out of convincing you that they're doing good things in conservation. So it's good to know the history of their collections, I think, and how they impact. We've spent time with that population. They're really struggling for a variety of reasons. One of the most important being that SeaWorld took so many of those individuals out of that population.
And ironically, meanwhile, if you can go on the internet and see a SeaWorld San Diego trainer telling a group of park guests that their work at SeaWorld is very important because there's this group of whales off the coast of the San Juan Islands that are struggling, and that the work that SeaWorld does is important because if they weren't doing it, then these animals would, it would make things worse for these animals. And this trainer is saying this, and she didn't even know the history of the fact that it was her company that was partially responsible for the state that this population is in now.
Well, thank you very much.
Hello. So I kind of wanted to build on that question, and I've heard some people say that SeaWorld actually has some animals behind the scenes, where that a lot of the conservation and rehabilitation efforts that we don't see go towards helping those animals. Is this true? And also, if it is, does the amount of money SeaWorld make through entertainment pay for these animals to be rehabilitated, and would it be possible for other organizations who don't use animals as entertainment to be able to fund this?
Sure. So you're basically asking how much out of the money that they make goes into conservation?
Yeah, and also if there are any animals that aren't used as show animals.
That are not used as show animals. Yeah, I can speak from when I was there. I know that they were doing a lot of good work with manatees and sea turtles. I personally helped rehab some manatees because early on when you first start as a trainer at the park, you don't get in the water with the animals right away. It's not like your first day you get to jump in with the dolphins. You spend a lot of time doing what we call the bucket scrubber. So you scrub a lot of fish buckets and you help the trainers behind the scenes and you learn the lines from the shows and you just get comfortable working around the stadium. And so I really wanted to get in the water with an animal, and in the animal care department they needed people to do round-the-clock care on a manatee baby whose mom had been killed by a boat propeller. So I got my first experience in the water with an animal was with a baby manatee in a little kiddie pool. And I think it was probably like 40 pounds, and it's just like, it was trying to suck on my hip. And so it was quite an experience. And so yeah, again, like they do good work, and so I definitely want to give them credit for that. So I did see that going on behind the scenes. I know that during the Gulf oil spill, they were out there rescuing animals. So SeaWorld does rescue animals, but I can also tell you stories of where they were called many times and refused to go and rescue an animal because they felt like they weren't going to be able to, like they'd rather let it die rather than make the effort to bring it in and try to rehab it and have it die in captivity. I wish Dean Gomersall from the film was here because he has the story better than I do, but it was a gray whale named JJ. Do you know the gray whale story? Yeah, that JJ was rescued, and apparently the SeaWorld veterinary staff was pretty clear that he wasn't going to make it in captivity. They really tried very hard to keep him alive, and they said that they put a radio tag on him, and then they sent him out, and apparently they stopped getting a signal from it, and they said, oh, the radio tag must have fallen off, and JJ's off, on his own and alive and swimming, but apparently he was very close to death when they released him. So a lot of their rescue efforts are highly publicized. But again, I don't want to fault them for the good work that they do. As far as the percentage of what they spend, I think they're like a $2.2 billion company per year. It's $2.5 billion, and the equivalent money that they spend on conservation would be like, let's say a university professor, I don't mean an adjunct professor, but a professor, would spending like about $17 a year from their salary on conservation. So again, they do spend money on conservation, but it's a very small amount compared to what they bring in. And plus, their institution actually gets grants that could go to other people. They actually apply for grants and use them that could go to other scientists that are doing work in the field.
Hello. I also don't agree with SeaWorld and whale captivity, but I'm also aware that if these animals were released in the wild, they wouldn't be able to survive, especially the ones that have been born into SeaWorld. So what do you guys think would be a solution to this?
Well, you're absolutely right. Most of the whales in SeaWorld's collections are actually very poor candidates for full release. They're just not healthy. I mean, without constant human intervention with medications, antibiotics specifically, and tooth flushes to constantly get the debris and the fecal matter out of the holes in their teeth, by the way, which ends up in their bloodstream and ends up with chronic infection. Those animals, like Tilikum, for example, would be dead in a matter of weeks, I'm sure, of probably some type of infection. So you hear, whale lovers say, we've got to release the whales. Well, that sounds pretty sexy and romantic and great, but in reality, that ain't going to happen, right? It would be a death sentence for most of them. One alternative that's being explored, and which I haven't been all that active in, is the concept of a sea sanctuary or a sea pen. The concept is something like this, where a cove somewhere, maybe in the Northwest, is purchased from private ownership. Some type of barricade, maybe some kind of type of netting is put out to keep the whales contained in a large area, not free to come and go necessarily, but contained in a natural setting where they can still access food, they can still access their medical care that would be necessary to keep them going. And I think Sam was saying that many of the animals there are sort of hybrids. They're hybrids from these kind of funky mixes of Icelandic DNA with Pacific Northwest DNA, transients with residents. There's inbreeding going on, and so from a conservation standpoint, conservation biology standpoint, you wouldn't release those types of animals back into the wild. That's an adulterated population. That's an adulterated gene pool, rather. So you've got this kind of funky hybrid animal from part Iceland, part Northwest, that ends up breeding, and then suddenly that gene pool is eroded, right? Because you've kind of introduced this genetic material that doesn't belong in it. So it'd be a difficult, I think, difficult thing to persuade biologists that that's a good idea to release those kinds of animals. So I think the cove, the sea pen concept is one that looks most realistic to me for the most of the animals.
Thank you.
And anyone else with a question? If you just want to raise your hand, I'll come with you. I saw first hand. I saw over here. Sorry, I know there's a few of us.
The good news is there's been 4 babies on the southern residents in the last 4 months, so that's great news. I want to ask you about the work that Dr. Visser's doing in New Zealand, and she free swims, which the videos are pretty amazing. Would you three, if had the opportunity, would you free swim with orcas?
It's a good question. You're no? You'd say no. I actually would go with Dr. Visser. I would go with Dr. Visser because she knows that population really well, and she knows their behaviors, and if they were accepting her and I was with her, I would feel totally comfortable. Would I jump off the boat and off the San Juan Islands now? No way. I wouldn't do it. I mean, and that's a good question because I did not, one of the things that I think people don't get is that when you're a trainer at SeaWorld, I mean, until you start seeing people get hurt and you start hearing about accidents, And even then, because I was young, I was 22 years old when I started, and I even saw, there's one guy named Mike Bose who had bite marks on either side of his torso from a whale named Kotar. And everybody would kid him about that. Oh yeah, that was when Kotar bit you. And it still didn't, I never thought that I would get hurt. You know, and it's amazing to me that I didn't see that. So I mean, now being a little older and wiser, I would probably think twice, but I would totally go in with Dr. Visser in a heartbeat.
There's no way you could pay me enough money to go in the water with a killer whale. I didn't want to be at Shamu Stadium, and I didn't want to work around Silicum because of its history. I was respectfully fearful of those animals, and I didn't 100% know that the trainers were going to get my back, if you will, if their horseplay got us into trouble or something like that. And I know that there's a lot of amazing trainers out there that know the risks and are there for that reason, but I was one of the ones that said, you know what, I'm good, move me back to the dolphin area where everything's fine. But yeah, so I have a healthy fear of killer whales when I was there, and in the wild, yeah, you couldn't pay me enough money.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up, off the subject, but I know that SeaWorld's new business model, I want your opinion on. I know that the Middle East and China and Russia's just put a permit in to be taking whales. I know that as our business model in the United States starts to unravel, as it has been, that they're moving their efforts to more favorable waters, as we say. What's the next step to stop that process, and how do you think we stop that process internationally going forward?
It's a good question. I spent a bit of time with Dr. Naomi Rose over the past couple of years, and she's been working, she goes to the IWC meetings every year, and she knows what's going on in Russia and going on with China. And her opinion was interesting. She said that she felt that the Chinese were more susceptible to US pressure, and that if things changed in the US, that there would be a little bit more pressure on them to change what they're doing, but she felt like the Russians were just gonna go for it. So, and then that brings into SeaWorld, like what SeaWorld can do, what we see right now is that they're aggressively pushing their same business model here, but at the same time, I think they know that this is a losing battle in the US, and eventually they're not going to be able to have killer whales anymore. But although they can't export their whales, they can export sperm, they can export the SeaWorld training model, and they've been doing that already. So for SeaWorld, it's like an opportunity for them to be consultants all over the world. And I certainly think that they were cheering when the Russians captured their whales, because again, although they can't bring those whales into this country, they can still get sperm, they can still get eggs, and they can still, it's still legal for them to get progeny from wild caught animals. So it's not illegal for them to do that right now. So I think for SeaWorld, it allows them to keep their business model and export it, and so they have no reason to protest against it. And so I can only tell you what Naomi said. I don't know about China and Russia that much, but that was her opinion.
I have a question. Thank you all. Amazing, amazing work here. One of the top lines in the movie, John, when you said you looked into their eyes and you knew something was deep in there. I mean, do you feel, any of you, from what you've seen, that they may even have more intelligence than humans? I mean, is there anything any insight on that?
That's every time we go around and talk to groups, or, I give a lecture somewhere or whatever, it's always the same question, right? How intelligent are they? And maybe that's kind of what you're getting at. And the answer is kind of complex. We don't even know what intelligence is among humans, right? We have this kind of cheesy IQ test, and some of us take it and say, oh my gosh, I'm a genius. And then if you're socioeconomically in a different category than the people who wrote the questions, right, then you may not answer it quite as well, because there's a bias there. So it's difficult to know what intelligence is. And in fact, they evolved on a different planet, right? They're like aliens booking around on this planet. So they're a completely different critter than we are. And so, but what we can say is, based on Dr. Marino's work, is that their brain is really complex, highly convoluted, very large weight to body mass ratio. parts of the brain that humans don't really have, kind of tied to perhaps emotional lives, as Lori would like to tell us. And so, what can we say? Well, I'm not sure, but they certainly seem pretty bright to me. And it is true, and I'm sure the former trainers in here would say the same thing. When you look into their eyes, somebody is definitely looking back, right? They get it. They know what's going on. And for me, the animals that were taken from the wild, you know, even when they were, for the animals that were a little older when they were removed from the wild, you know probably that they remember their life in the ocean. Now, that sounds a little hokey, right? I can't prove that. But you just have to think that they probably remember that. Thank you.
Hi, so thank you first of all for coming here, but my question is for you, Kim. Especially after all of your years at Whale and Dolphin Stadium, I'm just so surprised that you're not taking more of a stand on the issue of dolphin captivity.
Well, to be honest with you, I am still evaluating how I feel. Like I said before, like I had some great relationships with the dolphins, and it is what Sam was saying. It's 100% an ego thing. When you're an animal trainer and you're there and you're performing the shows, that's where, you know, everything's good, life's great, and, you know, you still have that mentality that, you know, you're doing good and all of that. Right now, my life has taken a different direction. I do have opinions, and I'm still learning from Sam. I'm learning from Naomi. I'm learning from Ingrid. I'm still doing all that research, and it's something that I'm slowly figuring out that I don't think that it's a good idea. And like I was saying before, I definitely think that they need to stop the artificial insemination that they do, that sort of thing. And there's parts like Clearwater. I know Clearwater does a lot of rescue and rehab. I don't research it that much, but you know, those are the kinds of, those are the kinds of aquariums that are taking steps in the right direction. And you know, killer whale training and killer whale habitats will never be big enough or well-suited enough or stimulated enough for those killer whales to thrive. Dolphins, you know, each one of us is going to have our own opinion. I'm leaning now towards, the more I learn, that's not, you know, it's not a good environment for them as well. Like I said, the pilot whales that they had taken, I don't understand why they're there. I don't understand why they're not being released because they were collected. And now they're in shows. So there's a lot of questions that SeaWorld needs to answer. And I'm just asking the question, why are they there? And I'm asking the question, you know, why are they artificially inseminating animals that aren't mature for that kind of, you know, I think it's the bottom line, it's money. I think it's really, that's really what they want. And it's all about how much money they're gonna make and to propagate this, you know, containment for entertainment scenario that they have going on. And my life has taken a different direction. I mean, to be completely honest with you, I'm not, like I think John Hargrove says, like he says that he's not an activist. He's an advocate. I don't even know what I am. I'm a person that has a story, and you know, here's my story, and maybe I don't have to be 100% on one side or the other, but this is my story, and I'm hoping people learn something from it. And you know, like I said, I think the biggest thing I can say right now is that I'm still learning. I'm still asking those questions. And you know, I might not be that vocal, you know, but that doesn't mean that I haven't changed. And you know, that's why I'm here right now. I'm hoping that just my personal story of the things that I had to deal with can help one person understand that it's not always a good, pleasant environment, you know, to be at SeaWorld. And you really got to think twice when you do look in their eyes and you realize that someone's home. And that, I mean, the fact that you're saying that they remember being in the ocean, that gives me chills. Like,
that's a perspective that really hits home with me right now, you know? And I hope each one of us can do what we can. You know, maybe you tell your friend, hey, you know what, let's go somewhere else. I really don't feel like contributing to going to SeaWorld. And for you, that's what you need to do. And maybe you can become a Sam or John and really become vocal. But I'm just not an advocate. No, I'm not an activist. Yeah,
I'm not an animal rights extremist.
Yes, yes. So, but if anybody wants to come and talk to me and hear my story, I'm not going to have all the answers, but maybe you can walk away and realize that, you know, some of the things that you thought were true aren't necessarily true.
And I really thank you so much for that really honest answer, because I think we all started in one place, and we've all gotten to where we're at through a whole series of having an experience that a lot of people didn't get a chance to have. I know a lot of people wanted to have, but there's been an evolution for all of us in our thinking, and I think we're all still, you know, there's still new information that's coming in and having us change our thinking. And I can remember when I first started doing this, when after Blackfish came out and I was doing more of these Q&As, people asked me what I felt about zoos. And did I think zoos were a good thing? And then people have asked me, well, why am I not a vegan? You know, and so there's all these places I can go with this. Like, and if I'm not against zoos and if I'm not a vegan, then do I have a right to even sit up here and talk to you and speak about my experience? But I think what Kim said is really important. She's had an experience that gives a window or a perspective into an industry that most people don't get. And just because she hasn't made, you know, come to a conclusion on what we should do, that doesn't mean that her experience isn't really important to share. So it's really great for you to come up here and do that.